is one that's a little bit more clear-cut, maybe not as complicated. Childcare facilities. Rhonda, do you want to explain on this one a little bit?
This is probably the one that I'm least familiar with, other than it does exempt property, a real property for a daycare facility, but there are requirements on that. So, and I'm not real familiar with the requirements, but I think they have to be qualified through
Texas Workforce.
Texas Workforce Commission, yeah.
Yeah, so and it's a local option exemption, so it's for cities and counties only. So a city or a county, a commissioner's court or city council would have to approve that exemption within their jurisdiction. And the exemption cannot be less than 50%. And they must meet the definition of a qualifying child care facility, which means they must participate in the Texas Workforce Commission's Texas Rising Star program, and at least 20% of the enrolled children must receive subsidized child care services. Now, this is going to be an administrative challenge for appraisal districts. It's not an annual application process. They just have to apply one time. So for us to be able to audit those, how do we know that they meet the qualifications that first year, that 20% of their enrolled children are subsidized children, but we don't know that the following year because they don't have to apply annually. So we're going to have a difficult time administering this. I don't know how many counties or cities are going to allow the exemption. That'd be something good to hear from the commissioner.
Well, this is one of those that many constituents, if you have kids in childcare, there's going to be a real pressure to accept this. But as we said, as usual, there are still many open-ended questions. Many daycares are in a lease space. So then the question gets to be a little bit about will the actual daycare get that? Will the landlord will likely be will be good. And then even if a daycare gets that, the question always is how much of that gets to the parents, right? And so, but it is going to be one that on the face of it is hard to explain to someone who has kids in daycare that we shouldn't be implementing that exemption.
And I got to tell you, I think this one is probably not going to impact much, but, well, and unfortunately it needed to because it is local option. And the maximum is 100%, but the other thing, Brent, you're going to have to audit is, okay, if you have a daycare, child care facility, I guess is the term in the statute, and it's your building, then obviously you save the money, you do what you want with it. But it also applies to landlords.
Yep.
Nothing else applies in the tax code to landlords, to allow an exemption. But if you're leasing property to a daycare, you get the exemption too. However, you are required to pass 100% of the tax benefit on to the daycare center, which Brent is also going to have to go audit and figure out,
check.
how do I do that? And what if they're only passing around 80%? Do you take it away?
Who applies for it? The tenant?
No, the landlord, the owner of the property
Has to-
makes the
And the
application.
property tax.
And this problem is serious. Well, part of the COVID relief package, Texas got $3 billion in 1 year to help keep daycares open. Daycares are in trouble.
Yeah.
And working families can't work unless they have daycare. And even with this in place, we're already believe that we're losing $9 billion in the Texas economy because of people who don't have daycare, can't afford to go to work. And unfortunately, I think you're right. I think that the governments are going to be between a rock and a hard place. What happened again in Austin was sort of what I started with. Austin recognized that there's a real serious problem and said, oh yes, by the way, county, you go ahead and fix it.
Right.
You pay for it.
It's not all that unusual.
Yeah, and yes, and that's the problem here. I think this is way too little. It's a great idea. Senator West from Dallas was the chief sponsor of that bill. But it got so watered down that I don't think it's going anywhere. But if you happen to own a daycare facility or a lease to one.
Well, and what's what's interesting, in our organization, our appraisal district statewide organization, when we talk about legislation and we meet with members of the legislature, we don't get into policy issues. You know, if they want to grant an exemption to daycare facilities, that's their choice. We just like to make sure that whatever they put on the books, we can administer it and we can do it consistently and effectively and efficiently. And there's just a lot of complications with this. Let's say, for example, if you are a landlord and you have a strip commercial center and you've got 7 tenants in that one building, but 1/7 of it goes to a daycare. Well, we're going to have to figure out how to allocate that exemption to that amount of square footage and the value of just that 1/7 of that property. And then the property owner has to disclose to the renters the amount by which the property taxes were reduced because of the exemption and give a credit on the reduction. That's going to be a complicated mess. And so there's just a lot of things that good intentions, just didn't work through all the intricacies of how this is actually going to play out.